here's possibly the coolest BMW engine ever, but what makes it so special? Is it because it uses parts from the M235i race car and bespoke parts that'll never be found in another BMW engine? Or is it the fact that it's a hybrid between the best sounding and the most track capable BMW engines? Well, in today's video, I've gathered info from the top BMW engineers to tell you the 12 upgrades made to the BMW M55 that make it so special. But first, some background. The original BMW M2 was meant to be a driver's car, something extremely fun that could be taken to the track and pushed to its limits. It was to be powered by the N55, which is one of BMW's most popular engines ever, and for good reason. It's extremely reliable, it sounds amazing, and it has great characteristics. The problem is that it's found in a lot of non-M cars like the 335i, which is an amazing car, but definitely not a track car. So before putting the N55 into the M2, BMW had to overhaul it so that it could withstand the hardest of track days. And when they did, they created what I think is the coolest BMW engine ever. It has all the amazing sound and spirit of the N55, as well as the track capabilities of the S55, which is the engine found in the M3 and M4. And everything they did to make it that way is right here in this manual put together by the engineers at BMW, and we're going to go through it together right now. The first thing BMW upgraded was the oil supply system, but before we get into that, we need to see how the regular N55 stays lubricated. As oil drips down from the engine, it goes down this angled oil pan into this lower area called the sump, where an oil pump brings the oil back up to the top of the engine and repeats the process, which is great for road use, but in high G situations like a track day, oil that's supposed to collect in the sump right here gets pushed back up or to the sides of the oil pan, meaning that no oil gets to the pump. And no oil to the pump equals no oil to the engine, which equals no more engine. So BMW added in a sump cover, which you can see right here, which let oil in but made it much more difficult for it to splash around or be pushed up once in the sump. But even with the cover, oil could still be taken away from the main pump, so they added another one. This secondary pump's job was to take oil that was pushed up out of the sump or to the sides of the oil pan and return it back to the main pump so that oil could be circulated throughout the engine. Luckily, BMW didn't have to make any of these parts since they were already being used in the M235i Racing, the M3, and the M4. Next, BMW had to do something about the spray-on cylinder liners. Just like the old oil system, it was beyond good on the road, but when you're on the track where you're at high temperature, high RPM, and high load, not so much. So BMW upgraded the cylinder linings to cast iron, which made for a much more reliable and durable engine, which could handle both stock and tune power on the track lap after lap. Along with the cylinder linings, the pistons were replaced with the ones from the S55, but with one extremely cool change. Since the lining was made out of cast iron, the first ring on the S55 piston had to be replaced with a bespoke, exclusive to the M2 piston ring that will never be found in another BMW engine. The final internal change was a new set of crankshaft bearings from the S55 engine. With proper oil circulation and engine strengthening taken care of, BMW had to focus on one of the most important things of any track-ready car: proper cooling. So along with this giant radiator that the N55 already had, the M2 adds a secondary radiator here on the left side of the car. That means coolant goes through both the main radiator and the secondary radiator, getting the most airflow possible, meaning that the engine can stay cool even when it's being pushed to its limits. Along with the secondary radiator over there, an oil cooler was also added to the right side of the car. So not only does oil go through this thermostat slash oil cooler, it also goes through this oil cooler at the front. And finally, it goes through this oil to coolant oil cooler, which is underneath of the coolant expansion tank. Talk about a tongue twister. Since the M2 is the only car that pairs the N55 with the 7-speed DCT transmission, it gets a DCT oil cooler right up here. With these changes, the M2's N55 became an absolute monster of an engine. It could easily handle track use, spirited backroad driving, and regular driving around the city just as well, all while sounding like music to the ears. But BMW wasn't done with their improvements, and not all engine changes were done to the engine. The intake on the M2 is different from the intake on any other N55. If you look at it right here, there's another hole, which, as BMW says, is for, I actually kind of forgot, is to optimize the power potential of the engine and for de-throttling purposes, which lets the slightly more powerful engine get all the extra air it needs. Of course, I replaced mine with a cold air intake, which makes amazing sounds like this. Modifications aside, the N55 in the M2 is the most powerful version ever built, with 365 horsepower and 343 pound-feet of torque. but it also has an overboost function which adds a momentarily 0.1 bar of boost, which brings the torque up to 369 pound-feet. The blow-off valve? This one honestly took me by surprise, as I always thought that BMW used diverter valves, but maybe in some applications they use a blow-off valve. Last but not least, the S55 spark plugs and ignition wiring harness were transferred over to the M2's N55, but all other electrical components are from the regular N55. All these modifications come together to make what's, in my opinion, the coolest BMW engine ever made. You take the N55's amazing characteristics, awesome sounds, and amazing reliability, and you pair it with the S55's incredible track capabilities, and you get such a cool engine. Anyways, thank you so much for watching today's video. There's another video on the screen right now which you'll enjoy just as much.